The way that the conceptualization of Hobbiton began was on our first trip to the location. We flew up there with Alan Lee and John Howe, our two conceptual artists.
There was a lovely bit of farmland up near Hamilton that the film paid the farmer not to put his sheep on there for a while.
Andrew.
This is Andrew. Nice to meet you, Andrew. Haven't met you before. This is Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
Very pleased to meet you.
Yes.
It was a very sort of steep, swampy piece of ground. People going out there now would not realise what the film company started with at the beginning.
We drove in, got out of the vehicles and looked at this place and thought, my God, we've just come to Hobbiton. There was the place for Bag End, there was the place for the mill, there's where the Green Dragon would go, here's where the Hobbit holes could go.
And they literally just sat there with their sketch pads, transforming this farmland on paper from just hills into a Hobbit village. Several months of very extensive work followed, which involved major earthworks. Just scoop out some of that and maybe put veggie patches in the middle. The establishment of a very solid road, which the New Zealand Army helped to build for us.
When the Army arrived with a great convoy of machinery and trucks, as it came up Buckton Road over here, the neighbours thought warfare was coming to the district, I think, and my phone was red hot that night. All around the chimney should be little bits of bracken. And
one of the things that's essential with Hobbiton is that this place has to look like hobbits have lived here for hundreds of years. And so we actually started to plant vegetables in the gardens of Hobbiton about a year before our filming. So we planted hedges and allowed them to grow for a year.
Real moss, real grass, real trees, and apparently real homesteads set into the rolling hills. And it meant that I didn't have to use my imagination anymore, because Hobbiton was there for the camera and the audience to see, and for Gandalf to feel at home.
Card things.
When you read the books, if you have any sort of imaginative bone in your body, you can't help but have an exact picture in your mind's eye of what Hobbiton looks like. And then to show up on the sets, you sort of think, that's exactly how I pictured it.
I remember the first day really clearly. We had already been portraying hobbits for a few months, and we got to go where hobbits were born. Sit. Yeah.
I mean, that one.
Hobbiton was incredible. When we all arrived there, we thought everyone wanted to stay there, you know.
We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. The Hobbit holes and the pathways and the, vegetable gardens and the wheat field.
Yeah, the sort of town center and the pub and this amazing bridge over this little pond. And it was just absolutely gorgeous.
All of the things that are rich and luscious and right about what was described in the trilogy about Hobbiton were there.
So you grab it, you eat, and put it down again, and then with your mouth full, you will say, say what you like about Mad Baggins, but no one keeps a better table.
And cut. We walked around, and it was all to our scale, so we could walk around and feel like hobbits. Open the doors and walk through the gardens and walk down the streets and see other people walking around like hobbits, and it was amazing.
Some of my favourite days filming certainly have been in Hobbiton when we did Bilbo's party, because there's a huge party atmosphere and there's cakes and people are dancing, and it's just hobbits in their element having fun.
And it in a way ultimately does represent what is at stake throughout the entire saga of the Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings is a mythology, it is a fairy tale, it's an adventure story. It never happened, except somewhere in our hearts. And yet there was Hobbiton in 3 dimensions and smoke coming out of the holes where they live underground. And I believed.
Stand by, everyone. Everyone, video feed and action!
When the hobbits arrive at the Bree gates, they arrive in the pouring rain and they're looking for a tavern called the Prancing Pony.
We have taken an enormous amount of care to try and build a cultural history to the peoples of Middle-earth through the use of props and wardrobe and set design.
One of the parts that came to me from Peter were that he wanted it to be a very real world. He wanted to believe that all of this existed, you know, like an alternative reality, I suppose, or a world before this world. So he wanted an incredible depth to it.
There was a darkness, a slightly gothic edge to Bree. The buildings all felt as though they were sort of leaning in over you. And of course all the humans were leaning in over the hobbits.
The hobbits have left the comfort of the Shire, and now all of a sudden the big folk are all around and you can't look anybody in the eye. And the faces that Peter, you know, the actors that he hired, gritty, intense. And so Bree is, in the books and in the movies, the first time that the hobbits, you know, have begun an adventure, I suppose, that is perilous.
Stand by for take.
Lots of light, lots of bubble and animation.
To believe the story, you've got to believe the world you're in, and a lot of work has gone into the detail, even though the camera won't pick up on it all.
Roll sound.
Sound speed.
Background action. And action.
You build an environment for the actors to act in.
For example, we have engaged this potter, Merrick Music, and he made all the pottery throughout the movie, including the pottery you see in Hobbiton and the Prancing Pony, and all of the stuff made according to Alan Lee's designs.
Many.
You don't expect to see every part of it on the screen, but you do build the whole environment. And if it gets shot, that's a real bonus. But if it doesn't get shot, it's still given those guys an environment to carry their craft forward, you know.
And my third cousin second to move on his father's side, if you follow me. Steady on, Frodo.
And that's the thing, even though in this film you may not see some of those details, they're definitely there, all put together to create such a rich world.
There is so much that we reference to Tolkien just within the production design, the visual look of the film. It actually makes it feel very real and historical.
644, take 8. 3, 2, 1, go!
Weathertop is where Strider, at the time, before he is known as Aragorn, and the hobbits, as he's taking them to Rivendell, travel up to the top of this old sort of castle ruin.
We found a location, brilliant location. It was like a mushroom rock that's about 300 feet high, and it has a top piece of grass that goes out to these limestone edges and then just drops off, and then in underneath there was a hollow on each side, and so we have Weathertop Hollow where they light the little fire, and then we created a staircase running up inside that rock to the Weathertop summit.
Just touch in on a couple of statues as if they're just isolated pops on statues that don't necessarily whip on or whip off, although you can put those in as well.
We've added these statues, which they're not complete yet. They're going to be more broken down than they're appearing at the moment.
Take out a sliver like that, take out a wedge. When the face goes back in, it will kind of swing back in that way.
The figures were sculpted by one of our very talented sculptors. And she made small maquettes from drawings that I'd done.
You just watch the wire. It's going now.
But as a sculptor, she's probably not the person to be actually attacking them and aging them down. So we have to be very, very careful in sort of not knocking off the best bits.
Push it that way.
I guess they just sort of represent some element of the age of this place, but they're also kind of like a brooding presence, a kind of foreboding of what's about to happen.
It's extremely frightening because it's the first time that the hobbits, you know, had been attacked by the ringwraiths.
The first thing you see is how scared Frodo is, and then you turn and look. And at that point, I think we go to 5 wraiths.
Horse and action!
So we're all armed, and by this point we realise that it's Frodo that they want. So the hobbits are in a formation where they're protecting Frodo.
Just need you circling around amongst yourselves a little bit more, guys. If you could just, yeah, that sort of feel. That's nice. one more.
They're in deep trouble when they get up the top.
It was really spooky to sort of be in that environment. Really a hollow, vacant, eerie, scary quality to the way that was described in the books and the way Peter has actualized it in the film.
Just react with your sword arm to. Just. Yeah.
Alrighty, lighting up the torch, thanks. Wind and smoke happening, please. Shooting now, standing by.
The whole set says this is not a place you really want to be, you know.
The Elven Refuge of Rivendell is hidden away in a deep valley in the foothills of the Misty Mountains, amongst woodlands, rivers, and waterfalls.
Rivendell is one of the real legendary locations in the book.
Set and action!
I think that's one of the challenges of making a book into a film, or even illustrating a book. You are supplanting someone's imagination with something that they're actually going to see with their eyes.
Rivendell is almost like an ideal community where elves live in a very close harmony with nature.
The hobbits have always been fascinated by elves because elves are creatures that are rarely seen but are shrouded in mystery.
So like people in the Shire have no idea that the elves live in trees in Rivendell.
As hobbits, this was all new to us as well, so we could easily convey those kind of emotions because it was quite different and beautiful.
Director Peter Jackson imagined an ethereal environment of faded grandeur.
Rivendell had an autumnal feeling, and that was partly because Rivendell is actually a society that's slightly in decay.
It feels old and definitely past its prime, which is quite suitable for the slight kind of air of melancholy that there is around that whole area of the elves.
It was this amazing forest with these little tiny, this amazing intricate set kind of plopped down in the middle of it.
The artists looked to Celtic decorative art and Art Nouveau as the starting points for elvish design.
Rivendell has a sort of fantasy, flowing beauty to it, and it's layers and layers, and everything has detail. Every pillar has things carved. Every roof has various filigree, and all the lanterns have beautiful shapes.
Rivendell was filmed on a variety of locations, including several enormous sound stages, an elaborate miniature set, and a large regional park north of Wellington.
I actually went out there a few times and just sat and sketched. That was a lovely experience, actually, just being there in this very beautiful environment. Trying to design a film set for the elves in the same way that the elves would have designed their own habitation, which is very much part of nature.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, there was waterfalls, and just every little nook and cranny was so beautiful.
One of the interesting things is the water in this system is a totally enclosed system that we've brought the water in by tanker and we will take it out by tanker. We can't introduce any of this water into the natural river system because the possibilities of chlorine. So the whole system is a waterproof system in the ground that can't leak.
Rivendell has a huge amount of green, a huge amount of flowers, vines.
We wanted to, as the elves would have done, to have made the buildings kind of fit around the trees so that we wouldn't actually have too much of an impact on the landscape.
I mean, it's just this perfect little magical place in the middle of everything green and alive.
Okay, let's set up, please. Picture.
You know, it's funny because the shooting schedule in some really interesting ways mimics the adventures that the hobbits go through in the books. And so to all of a sudden be able to walk onto a set that was this paradise, this sort of Garden of Eden, this tranquil, lush, beautiful environment, there was no acting required.
Cut. That was good. That was nice.
I think Rivendell was a good example of somewhere that felt real, but also totally unlike anywhere that anyone had ever been before.